They told her room 304 was empty. No guests, no key cards, no signs of life. Yet late that night, as Claire stood before the silent door, someone knocked back. Claire didn't scream. She only stared, heart pounding. The knock echoed twice more, firm and certain, then stopped altogether, leaving her standing in frozen darkness. She whispered, "Hello?" But no voice answered. Claire had come to this city for a fresh start, carrying burdens from her past she could barely name. The hotel was meant to be safe, unremarkable, just a room for rest between flights. But that simple expectation unraveled the moment she touched that door. The staff insisted 304 had been shut for weeks. The records confirmed it, yet the knocking revealed that something, or someone, refused to accept that silence. That night would mark the first in a series of events that shattered every assumption Julia held about safety, about memory, about what a building can hide. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. From that moment on, every detail around room 304 grew more mysterious. Who had been inside that room when staff said it was empty? Why did the records show no guest logs, yet security tape recorded the door swinging, the handle shifting in the frame? What dark history clung to that space, whispering in gaps between the walls? Hotel guests had long murmured of odd occurrences, lights flickering, doors slamming though hallways were vacant. The manager insisted nothing was amiss, housekeeping denied entry, and maintenance logs showed no repairs. Yet those who walked the halls late at night swore they glimpsed a figure slip through the doorway of room 304. One security guard claimed, in a hushed voice, that he saw someone vanish through a locked door, as if the walls themselves swallowed them. That testimony would become the hinge upon which every investigation turned. Claire Mitchell was 47 years old, a nurse who had built her life on caring for others while quietly carrying the weight of her own losses. Widowed 3 years earlier, she was still adjusting to life as a single parent, raising her teenage daughter who had just started high school. The trip to the city was supposed to be routine, a medical conference her hospital asked her to attend. But beneath the surface, she dreaded the loneliness that came with traveling without family. For someone like Claire, nights in anonymous hotel rooms often meant the return of restless memories, reminders of the life she had shared with her late husband and the quiet resolve it took to keep moving forward. When she checked into the Grand Crest Hotel, she was just hoping for a clean bed and silence, a short escape from the fatigue of her everyday routine. The Grand Crest had once been a jewel of the downtown skyline. Built in the 1920s, it embodied the roaring energy of a city in its prime. Grand chandeliers, hand-carved balustrades, marble floors worn smooth by a century of footsteps. By the time Claire arrived, its elegance was faded but still commanding. Guests whispered about the charm of staying in such a historic place. The rumors persisted of darker memories embedded in its halls. Fires had once forced evacuations, and there were stories of guests who checked in, but never checked out. A chambermaid, in hushed tones, told newcomers about strange accidents in the old wing, elevators that stopped on empty floors, and unexplained calls to the front desk from rooms listed as vacant. To outsiders, they were just stories, but to those who worked there, these whispers were treated like unspoken warnings that some parts of the hotel held more than history. As Claire settled in, she encountered the staff who would play pivotal roles in her story. The hotel manager presented himself as calm and professional, assuring every guest that the building was safe, though his eyes flickered uneasily whenever questions about the old rooms surfaced. The night porter, a younger man who often worked the late shifts, was less careful with his words. He once admitted to colleagues that he heard footsteps echoing from hallways he had already locked for the night. And the housekeeping team carried their own inconsistencies, some insisting that certain rooms had not been touched in months, while others hinted that linens were mysteriously needing to be changed without explanation. Each perspective told a slightly different version of reality, and it was within those contradictions that Claire began to notice a deeper tension hidden beneath the polished hospitality of the Grand Crest. Claire's vulnerability became the emotional core of her stay. Traveling alone in a building layered with decades of unresolved questions, she sought rest, but found herself unsettled by how quickly the hotel seemed to close in around her. Her daughter's voice over the phone reminded her of what she had to return to, but she couldn't shake the sense that something was watching, waiting, just beyond the walls. For someone like Claire, who spent her life trusting evidence, charts, and medical facts, the uncertainty of what she was beginning to sense inside the Grand Crest was the most unsettling experience she had ever faced.
Claire Mitchell arrived at the front desk late in the afternoon, her suitcase trailing behind her with the wear of years on the road. She asked for something simple, a quiet room, away from the elevators if possible. The receptionist tapped her keyboard, nodded politely, and after a brief pause said, "Room 304. Claire smiled, relieved to know she could finally settle down after hours of travel. But before the key card could slide across the counter, the manager appeared. He leaned closer, glanced at the computer screen, and interrupted with a calm but firm voice. "No, not 304. That one's under maintenance. Put her in 306 instead." The receptionist hesitated, confused, but quickly changed the assignment. Claire, weary and uninterested in hotel politics, accepted the new card and made her way upstairs. Still, she remembered the odd way the manager's hand lingered over the keyboard, as though he wanted to ensure she never stepped foot in the room just down the hall. Her room was modest, dated wallpaper fading around the corners, but the bed looked clean, and that was all she cared for. After a shower and a call to her daughter, Claire lay back, letting her eyes close. It was around midnight when she stirred, awoken by a sound she could not ignore. From across the hallway, where 304 was supposed to sit empty, came a slow, deliberate knock. 3 soft taps, followed by silence. At first she thought it might be pipes or an echo from another guest, but then a second series of knocks came, louder this time, insistent, timed with the cadence of someone standing on the other side of that very door. Claire sat upright, her breath caught in her chest. She told herself she was imagining things, yet she could hear it as clearly as her own heartbeat. She gathered her courage, slipped on her robe, and opened her door. The hallway stretched quiet and still, carpet muffling every step. She moved toward 304, her hand hovering just inches from the handle. With the kind of caution only fear can teach, she raised her knuckles and knocked once. The sound echoed faintly, then faded. For a long moment, silence held. Then suddenly, 2 sharp knocks came back from within the locked room. Claire jumped, her body pressed against the wall, and the emptiness of the corridor seemed to thicken around her. She whispered into the wood, "Hello? Is someone in there?" No voice replied. The only response was the memory of those knocks vibrating in her bones. Shaken, Claire hurried back to 306 and locked herself inside. She barely slept, staring at the thin crack of light under her door, certain that at any moment the knocking would resume. By morning, she reported what she had heard to the front desk, expecting at least concern, maybe an apology. Instead, the manager repeated himself with a calmness that chilled her more than any sound in the night. "Room 304 is sealed. It's unoccupied. It's been locked for weeks. No one is in there." But Claire knew what she had heard, and the weight of those knocks followed her long after the sun rose. The morning after the knocks from room 304, Claire Mitchell made her way to the front desk, still unsettled, her voice shaky as she explained what had happened in the night. She described the sound in detail, the cadence of the knocks, the way it had responded to her own hand on the door. The receptionist, young and polite, exchanged an uneasy glance with the manager before giving her the same rehearsed line. "Room 304 is locked, Mrs. Mitchell. It hasn't been used for weeks." Claire pressed harder, insisting that she hadn't imagined it, that someone was inside. The manager's tone remained calm, but his words carried an edge that felt dismissive. Perhaps the sound traveled from another floor. It happens in older buildings. But Claire wasn't convinced. She had been a nurse for more than 20 years, trusted to listen carefully, to notice the difference between a faint sound and a direct reply. What she heard in the hallway last night was no accident. Out of frustration, Claire asked to see the hotel's records, determined to find proof. After hesitation, the manager reluctantly opened the log. The official registry confirmed his claim. Room 304 had not been assigned to any guest for several weeks, but the neat printed pages didn't ease her unease. If no one was registered, how could she explain what she heard? When she mentioned the knocks to a housekeeper who had been dusting in the lobby, the woman paused, lowered her voice, and muttered, "We had to replace the linens in 304 just last week." She quickly added, "But maybe they were moved there by mistake," before hurrying away. The contradiction only deepened her suspicion. Still disturbed, Claire contacted the local police. At first, they seemed indifferent. A knock on a door hardly counted as an emergency, especially when the hotel insisted the room was vacant. But when Claire refused to let the matter drop, officers agreed to send a patrol to conduct a routine sweep. What they found didn't calm her. It unsettled them too. During the walkthrough, one officer claimed he distinctly heard a voice from inside 304. Another swore he heard faint movement. Yet when the door was unlocked with the master key, the room was spotless, bed made, curtains drawn, and air stale with disuse. There was no sign of forced entry, no belongings, nothing out of place. Over the next days, inconsistencies began to stack up. The hotel's internal phone system showed that a call had been placed from 304 to the front desk just 2 nights earlier, though the clerk on duty never denied picking it up. When confronted, the manager suggested it was a technical glitch. A second housekeeper whispered to Claire that she had once opened 304 to find damp towels left in the bathroom, though the key log showed no one had accessed the room. Rumors spread among the staff. Some said squatters had found a way in through the service elevator. Others muttered about a prank pulled by former employees. Theories circulated, but none held up against the facts. The room remained locked. The record showed no check-ins, yet the evidence of human presence continued to emerge. The police returned one evening after another guest reported unusual noises near the 3rd floor. This time, 2 officers stood outside 304 as they conducted the sweep. One later told colleagues that as he placed his hand on the door, he felt a vibration from inside, almost like someone was leaning against the other side. He shouted for anyone present to come out, but the silence returned, heavy and unbroken. When they entered again, the room was still empty, yet one officer swore he heard a faint whisper echo in the air, as though the walls themselves were carrying a voice that had no body. For Claire Mitchell, the unanswered questions were piling up faster than the reassurances she was given. Was someone hiding inside the hotel, slipping into rooms when no one watched? Had the staff staged a cruel prank at her expense? Or had a guest somehow managed to bypass the registry and sneak into 304 unnoticed? Each theory seemed possible, yet none explained the knocks that matched her own, the call that had been placed, or the linens that had been changed without authorization. Every answer the hotel offered only opened another question, and Claire realized she had stumbled into a mystery that refused to stay quiet.
By the time Claire Mitchell returned home from her trip, what had begun as a strange, private experience was already leaking into the public eye. Word of the unexplained disturbances at the Grand Crest reached a local newspaper after an off-duty officer mentioned the peculiar fingerprints that didn't match anyone on record. Soon a journalist contacted Claire, asking if she would share what she heard in front of room 304. Reluctant at first, Claire finally agreed to speak. She did not sensationalize her story, but her steady description of the knocks and the way they responded to her hand was compelling enough to draw interest beyond the city. Within weeks, the Grand Crest Hotel found itself under unwanted attention. Management issued a carefully worded statement insisting the property was safe and the rumors unfounded, But the more they tried to contain the story, the more people seemed drawn to it. Television crews lingered on the sidewalk, guests whispered in the lobby, and the reputation of the empty room spread far beyond the hotel's walls. Investigators who remained curious decided to press further, this time with technology that hadn't been available decades earlier. A surveillance camera was discreetly placed in the hallway, its lens fixed directly on room 304. Several nights passed with nothing unusual, until, on the fifth night, the footage revealed something troubling. At precisely 2:13 a.m., the door to 304 shifted slightly. Not enough to open, but enough that the latch and frame visibly moved as if pressure came from inside. Yet the key log showed no entries, and the door remained locked. When the police reviewed the footage, they agreed it was not the building settling or a trick of light. The door had moved. To push the inquiry further, thermal imaging equipment was brought in. On more than one occasion, faint heat signatures registered inside 304. But each time officers entered the room immediately afterward, it was empty. No furniture displaced, no sign of trespass, only the lingering evidence that something or someone had been there. As the mystery deepened, red herrings multiplied. A self-proclaimed psychic offered her services, insisting that the room was a passageway for restless spirits trapped between time and memory. She claimed she could sense multiple presences lingering in the walls, but many dismissed her as opportunistic. A veteran security guard who had worked elsewhere in the city raised a different theory, suggesting the Grand Crest had once been a hub for discreet activities, including human trafficking, and that 304 had been used for meetings or confinement long ago. His claim unsettled many, though it lacked direct proof. A detective familiar with missing persons cases tied to the area wondered aloud whether the unexplained disappearances of guests in the late 1970s and early 1980s might be connected to the room's legacy. Each explanation carried its own weight, and yet none fully accounted for what the evidence showed. Doors moving on their own, heat where no one was present, voices heard in a sealed space. For Claire, each theory only deepened her determination to learn the truth. Though she had returned home, she could not let the story rest. She began contacting families of individuals who had once stayed at the Grand Crest and never returned. Some were reluctant to revisit the past, but others opened their homes and memories to her. One woman, now in her 60s, described how her brother had checked into the hotel in 1981 for a business trip and was never seen again. The police at the time ruled it a runaway, but she remembered receiving one strange phone call days later, a faint voice whispering her name before the line went dead. Another family recalled that their parents had been frequent guests until, after staying in the early 1990s, they abruptly refused to ever book a room there again, citing an experience they would never discuss. With each story, Claire felt the weight of the mystery pressing closer, connecting her own terrifying night to decades of pain and unanswered questions. Then, just as Claire's investigation was gaining momentum, she received an anonymous message slipped under her front door. It was typed, not handwritten, and contained only 6 words: "Stop asking questions about room 304. No signature, no return address, no clue to who had sent it. The warning shook her deeply. Was it the hotel trying to protect its reputation? A local who feared she was stirring old legends? Or someone who knew more about what had been concealed within those walls than they dared to admit? For Claire Mitchell, the threat only confirmed one thing: whatever was hiding in room 304 was not meant to be uncovered.
Claire Mitchell's determination to uncover the truth about room 304 only grew stronger after the anonymous warning. She had always believed that persistence was part of her nature, a trait that carried her through nursing shifts that stretched long into the night, a trait that kept her moving after the sudden death of her husband. Now that persistence was fixed on the mysteries hidden within the Grand Crest. Encouraged by the scraps of evidence she had already collected, Claire filed a Freedom of Information Act request, hoping the paper trail might shed more light on the old deaths tied to the hotel. What came back weeks later was more revealing than she expected. Buried within the documents were police reports and legal papers that had been sealed from public view for decades. They painted a picture of a hotel that had fought desperately to protect its reputation while quietly settling multiple lawsuits tied directly to room 304. Families of missing persons had once pressed the hotel for answers, claiming their loved ones were last seen inside the Grand Crest. In nearly every case, settlements were reached privately, records sealed, and public statements limited to generic phrases about unfortunate circumstances. The most chilling discovery came from an internal police memo dating back to the early 1980s. At least 5 unexplained disappearances were tied to room 304 over a span of 40 years. The names changed, the circumstances varied, but the pattern remained the same. Guests who checked in or were last seen near the 3rd floor simply vanished. In 2 cases, belongings were found neatly packed inside 304, as if the guest had stepped out momentarily and never returned. In another, a suitcase remained in the lobby for days, unclaimed, until the family arrived searching. Each time, police offered explanations. Perhaps the individual had chosen to leave. Perhaps they had debts or reasons to disappear. But the families who had lived with the silence never accepted those answers. Now, with the files laid bare, Claire saw clearly that the official narrative had been one of dismissal, designed to bury the pattern rather than confront it. Among the reports, Claire found testimony that cut deeper than anything she had read before. It was from a young man who had stayed in the hotel in 1980. He had survived an incident in room 304 and was interviewed by police days later. His account described a night nearly identical to Claire's own. He spoke of hearing a knock on the wall, tentative at first, then deliberate. He had knocked back, and the sound mirrored his in perfect rhythm. He told investigators he felt certain there was someone inside with him, though the room was locked from the inside and no one could be found. The file noted that his testimony grew increasingly erratic, as if fear had burrowed deep into his mind. The chilling detail that struck Claire most was his final recorded statement. "It answered me. It always answers." Days after giving this testimony, he vanished. The case was closed without resolution, his name added to the list of the disappeared. For Claire, the realization was overwhelming. What she had dismissed as a terrifying but isolated incident was part of a long history of unexplained encounters stretching back decades, each marked by the same unnerving sound. The knock that had followed her in the hallway was not just a trick of imagination. It was the same pattern that had haunted others before her, some of whom had never returned home. The weight of those voices, those families still searching for closure, pressed heavily on her heart. She could no longer convince herself that she was merely a witness. She had become part of the same story that had swallowed so many before her. As she sat with the documents spread across her kitchen table, her daughter asleep in the next room, Claire Mitchell felt a new fear creep into her thoughts, not just of the unanswered questions, but for her own safety. The anonymous note had not been an idle threat. She wondered who had placed it under her door, and whether they were watching her even now. She could not shake the thought that by prying into the secrets of room 304, she had pulled herself into the same current that had swept away others. And as she stared at the final words of that long-forgotten testimony, echoing in her mind, "It always answers," Claire knew the sound of those knocks might never leave her. Claire Mitchell's story does not close neatly, nor does it offer the comfort of certainty. The Grand Crest Hotel, once a proud symbol of the city's elegance, has since locked and sealed room 304, claiming it is closed for, quote, structural repairs. Yet for those who know the truth buried in old police files, in whispered testimonies, and in Claire's own trembling voice, the explanation does little to quiet the unease. To this day, no registered guest has ever officially stayed in that room again. Still, staff who pass the third floor late at night speak of the same sound Claire first heard, the deliberate echo of knuckles against wood, an invitation or a warning that answers itself in the silence. The records say the room is empty. The stories say otherwise. So the questions remain, echoing with the weight of every unsolved disappearance, every family still waiting for answers. Was room 304 haunted, the restless imprint of lives ended violently within its walls? Or was it something far more human, a secret hidden and protected for decades, the kind of secret powerful enough to erase names from registries and silence those who came too close? Claire Mitchell's courage in pursuing the truth reminds us of the price that often comes with seeking clarity where others prefer shadows. But even she admits that the knock she once heard has never left her mind. It was real, immediate, and intentional. And perhaps most haunting of all, it was not hers alone. What do you think was really happening inside room 304? Was it a remnant of something supernatural, echoing across generations? Or was it something far darker, the kind of hidden truth that institutions bury under paperwork and fear? The answer may never come, and that absence itself becomes part of the terror, the sense that some doors, once approached, never truly close again. And if you thought this was chilling, wait until you hear what was discovered beneath a family home in rural Texas, where an ordinary renovation uncovered secrets no one in the town was prepared to face. That is a story we will explore next. Subscribe so you never miss the next one.